"You're nothing but a decrepit leech sucking the life from our future," Jennifer hissed when she thought Martin couldn't hear, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his son's arm as they plotted in the kitchen. "We'll kick your father out after Christmas, he's had his run in this house." The words sliced through Martin Winter's heart like shattered glass, each syllable drawing blood from a man who had given everything to his family. At 60 years old, with arthritis gnarling his once strong carpenter's hands and grief still hollowing his chest from losing his beloved wife, Martin stood frozen in the shadowed hallway, listening as his only son, the boy he had coached through Little League and worked double shifts to put through college, mumbled his agreement. "Yeah, the old man's had his time. We need the space for when we start having kids." Jason's voice carried none of the hesitation Martin desperately searched for. Just cold calculation. Just betrayal. Martin retreated silently to his room, the guest room, as Jennifer had pointedly begun calling it in recent months. His breathing came in shallow, painful bursts as he lowered himself to sit on the edge of the bed he'd purchased with his retirement savings when moving in after Sarah's funeral. The walls around him held photographs of a family that apparently existed only in faded prints now: Martin and Sarah on their wedding day, Jason's graduation, the fishing trip where 13-year-old Jason had caught his first bass. In every image, Martin's arm was protectively wrapped around his son's shoulders. The cruel irony wasn't lost on Martin. Just 3 years ago, he had sold the family home, the 3-bedroom colonial he and Sarah had scrimped and saved for decades to buy, where Jason had grown up, to help his son and daughter-in-law with the down payment on this sprawling suburban house. "It's too big for just me now," he had told Jason, handing over a check for $175,000. "Your mother would have wanted you to have it for your future family." What Martin had carefully omitted was that he'd actually kept a significant portion of the sale proceeds in a separate account. What he'd also neglected to mention was that the gift toward this new house came with legal strings that Jason and Jennifer had signed without reading carefully, blinded by their excitement over the windfall. For 3 excruciating weeks after overhearing their plans, Martin maintained a convincing facade. He smiled through family dinners, nodding pleasantly when Jennifer complained about his clutter taking up space. He pretended not to notice when conversations abruptly halted as he entered rooms, or how they began calculating food costs when he reached for seconds at dinner. Each small cruelty, the way Jennifer accidentally donated his favorite chair to charity, how Jason suddenly found reasons to decline their weekly chess games, was another knife twist in an already bleeding wound. But Martin Winters hadn't built a successful carpentry business through impulsive decisions. Behind his increasingly stooped shoulders and beneath his thinning white hair, a strategic mind worked methodically. Each night after Jason and Jennifer retired to their master suite, Martin made quiet phone calls from the backyard patio. During their weekly date nights, he visited his longtime attorney, Harriet Goldstein, signing papers with a peaceful smile that left the lawyer puzzled. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Martin?" Harriet had asked, her eyes concerned above her reading glasses. "This seems rather extreme." "More certain than I've been about anything since Sarah's diagnosis," Martin replied, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Sometimes lessons need to be memorable to stick, Harriet." On Christmas Eve, Martin watched his son and daughter-in-law open the expensive gifts he'd purchased, a designer handbag for Jennifer that she barely glanced at, golf clubs for Jason that earned a perfunctory hug. He smiled through their token present to him, slippers and a subscription to a streaming service they knew he never used. That night, Martin sat alone in his room long after the house fell silent, touching Sarah's photograph one last time before carefully packing it away. The morning after Christmas, Martin woke before dawn. His single suitcase had been methodically packed for days, important documents and irreplaceable mementos safely stored. With practiced quiet from years of trying not to wake Sarah during her illness, he carried his belongings to the front porch and called a taxi. His wedding ring glinted in the winter sunrise as he wrote a brief note and left it propped against the coffee maker. His son and daughter-in-law wouldn't operate until they stumbled downstairs around 9, gone to see about a new living arrangement. Merry Christmas! By noon, their frantic calls began. Martin watched his phone light up from the comfort of a hotel room 10 miles away but let each go to voicemail. The messages evolved from confused to concerned to angry as the hours passed. It wasn't until late afternoon, when Jason and Jennifer returned from searching his usual haunts, that true panic set in. Their luxury SUV screeched into the driveway, and Martin imagined their faces as they confronted the jarring red sold sign hammered into the manicured front lawn. The house they believed was theirs, the house they had made plans in, the house from which they planned to evict him, had never fully belonged to them at all. What they didn't know, what they would soon discover through the formal documents waiting in their mailbox, was that Martin had maintained legal ownership through a cleverly structured trust. The gift had been contingent on Martin's lifetime right to reside in the property, a clause buried in fine print they'd never bothered to read. His attorney had executed his instructions perfectly. The house was indeed sold, but not to strangers. Martin had found a young family, much like he and Sarah had once been, struggling to find affordable housing in the overpriced market. He'd offered them a price well below market value, with a single stipulation: immediate occupancy required. The 30 days written notice of eviction addressed to current occupants would be waiting in their mailbox, alongside a letter explaining exactly what Martin had overheard that night in the hallway. The proceeds from the sale were already distributed, half to a scholarship fund in Sarah's name at the local community college, half to a trust for any grandchildren that might someday exist, accessible only when they turned 25. As twilight settled over the city, Martin's phone finally fell silent. He imagined Jason and Jennifer standing in that cavernous foyer, realization dawning as they read his attorney's meticulous explanation. He pictured the shock on Jennifer's face, the dawning horror in Jason's eyes as they understood that their cruel plotting had cost them everything. Martin felt no triumph, no vindictive satisfaction, only a deep, hollow ache where family love should have resided. He opened his laptop and confirmed his flight details for the following morning. Arizona's dry heat would be good for his arthritis, and the small but comfortable condo he'd purchased sight unseen awaited him. Perhaps, in time, Jason would learn the lesson Martin had tried to teach him throughout his life: that family meant something sacred, something beyond convenience and calculation. The fragile thread of communication that began with the ultrasound photo strengthened gradually over the following week. Jason's texts evolved from terse updates about appointments to hesitant questions about pregnancy symptoms Sarah had experienced when carrying him. Martin answered each one with careful restraint, offering wisdom without presuming reconciliation. He learned that Jason and Jennifer had found a small 2-bedroom apartment in a different suburb, a significant downgrade from their former home, but within their dramatically reduced means. By late March, Martin's routine had expanded to include weekend video calls where Jennifer would briefly appear, her face tightened with lingering resentment but softened by the growing swell of her belly. She rarely spoke directly to Martin, but he noticed how she no longer left the room entirely when Jason called. It was a minuscule olive branch, but Martin recognized it for the effort it represented. "She's still angry," Jason admitted during one call in early April, after Jennifer had excused herself. His son looked thinner, the designer clothes replaced by simple cotton shirts, dark circles shadowing his eyes from working 2 jobs. "But the baby, it's changing things. Making us think about what matters." Martin nodded, careful not to push. "Parenthood has a way of reshuffling your priorities." "Dad," Jason's voice dropped, eyes darting to ensure Jennifer wasn't within earshot. "I need to ask you something important." He hesitated, the old entitlement briefly flickering across his features before being replaced with something Martin hadn't seen in years: humility. "The trust fund you set up for the baby. Is it real?" Jennifer thinks it might have been a bluff. Martin felt a complex twist of emotions. Disappointment that his son's thoughts still turned first to money, but hope that Jason was thinking about his child's future. It's real. Half the proceeds from the house sale. Your child will have access when they turn 25. Relief washed over Jason's face, followed quickly by shame. I'm not asking because we want. I know why you're asking, Martin interrupted gently. You want to know your child will be secure, even if you struggle. That's what parents do. A tear slipped down Jason's cheek, the first Martin had seen since Sarah's funeral. I don't know how to do this, Dad. How to be a father when I can barely keep the lights on. When I've messed up so badly. For the first time since overhearing that devastating conversation in the hallway, Martin felt something inside him soften completely. Nobody knows how to be a parent at first, son. We all learn by doing. By making mistakes and trying to fix them. Like the mistakes I made with you? Jason's voice was barely audible. Martin paused, choosing his words carefully. Yes, like those. After the call ended, Martin sat in his workshop surrounded by half-finished wooden toys he'd begun crafting for his grandchild. His hands, though stiffened by arthritis, still remembered the skills that had supported his family for decades. He ran weathered fingers along the smooth curve of a rocking horse, remembering the one he'd made for Jason's third Christmas, the year Sarah had been laid off and presents were scarce but joy had been abundant. That night, Martin made a decision. He contacted Harriet, his attorney, with new instructions regarding the trust. May brought unseasonably hot temperatures to Arizona and a phone call that changed everything. Jennifer's voice, strained and frightened, greeted Martin instead of Jason's. He's been in an accident, she said without preamble. He fell asleep driving home from his night shift. The car's totaled. Her voice broke. He's going to be okay, but he can't work for at least 6 weeks. We can't, she stopped, pride warring with necessity. The medical bills, plus rent, and the baby coming. I don't know what to do. Martin was booking a flight before the call ended. The apartment complex where Jason and Jennifer lived was a far cry from their former neighborhood. Paint peeled from weathered siding, and security bars covered ground-floor windows. Martin carried his single suitcase up 3 flights of stairs, his knees protesting each step. When Jennifer opened the door, her composed facade crumbled at the sight of him. You came, she whispered, one hand protectively cradling her 7-month belly, the other gripping the doorframe as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Of course I came, Martin replied simply. Jason lay on a pull-out couch in the living room, his left leg elevated in a cast, his right arm similarly immobilized. Fading bruises mapped his face, but his eyes, when they opened at the sound of Martin's voice, held a clarity Martin hadn't seen in years. Dad! The word emerged as a half-sob. Martin set down his suitcase and moved to his son's side, careful not to jostle his injuries. I'm here now, he said, gently resting a hand on Jason's uninjured shoulder. I'm here. The next few days revealed the true extent of their precarious situation. Past due notices were stacked on the kitchen counter. The refrigerator contained little besides condiments and a half-gallon of milk. Jennifer, now 8 months pregnant and exhausted from caring for Jason while continuing to work full-time, had been skipping meals. Without fanfare or lecture, Martin slipped into the caretaker role he'd perfected during Sarah's illness. He paid the overdue bills, stocked the refrigerator, and took over Jason's physical care so Jennifer could rest. In the evenings, when Jason slept under the influence of pain medication, Martin sat with Jennifer at the small kitchen table. Why are you doing this? She finally asked on the 3rd night, her voice hollow with exhaustion. After what we said about you. After what we planned to do. Martin considered her question carefully, noting how her defensive posture had gradually softened in his presence. Because family isn't conditional, he said at last. It's not something you earn or deserve. It simply is. We didn't treat you like family, Jennifer whispered, tears welling in her eyes. We treated you like a burden. Martin nodded, not denying the painful truth. Yes, you did. And now you're helping us anyway. A tear slipped down her cheek. I don't understand. Martin thought of Sarah, of what she would say in this moment. Understanding will come later, he told Jennifer gently. Right now, you need to focus on bringing my grandchild safely into this world. The rest, forgiveness, healing, that's a longer journey. Jennifer's water broke 2 weeks early, during a thunderstorm that knocked out power to their building. Martin drove them to the hospital in the used sedan he'd purchased with cash the day after arriving, navigating flooded streets with the calm precision that had always been his hallmark. 14 hours later, Martin sat beside Jason's wheelchair in a sterile hospital room, watching as his son held his daughter for the first time. The tiny bundle, wrapped in a pink hospital blanket, had Sarah's distinctive chin and a tuft of hair the exact shade Martin's had been before age silvered it. Sarah, Jason said softly, looking up at Martin with swollen, tear-filled eyes. We're naming her Sarah. If that's okay with you. Martin couldn't speak past the knot in his throat. He simply nodded, one gnarled hand reaching out to touch the impossibly soft cheek of his granddaughter. Later, when Jennifer slept and baby Sarah rested in the hospital bassinet, Jason gripped his father's hand with desperate intensity. I need you to know something, he said, voice raw with emotion. When I was trapped in the car, before the paramedics came, all I could think about was you and Mom. About how I failed you both. His fingers tightened around Martin's. I'm so sorry, Dad. God, I'm so sorry. Martin felt decades of hurt and disappointment crystallize into this singular moment. His injured son, the newborn granddaughter named for his beloved wife, the stark hospital room that somehow contained all that remained of his family. The anger he'd nursed like a flame had burned down to embers, leaving behind something stronger and more enduring. I know you are, he said softly, returning his son's grip with equal fervor. And I forgive you. 1 week later, Martin signed a 1-year lease on a 2-bedroom apartment in the same complex as Jason and Jennifer's. The real estate agent handling his Arizona condo was instructed to sell it and forward the proceeds. When Jason protested, Martin silenced him with a raised hand. I'll get my own place, he insisted. But close enough to help with baby Sarah while you heal. Close enough for her to know her grandfather. That night, as Martin assembled a second-hand crib in his newly rented apartment, he found himself talking aloud to Sarah as he often did in private moments. You should see her, my love. She has your chin, your determination. He chuckled softly, fingers working methodically to connect the wooden rails. And if I'm not mistaken, she has your stubborn streak too. 3 days old and already making her opinions known. A warm breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of approaching rain. Martin paused, looking at the family photograph he'd already placed on the nightstand, himself, Sarah, and a teenage Jason, all smiling against the backdrop of the Grand Canyon. We've come full circle, he murmured to the empty room. Not the way we planned, but perhaps the way they needed. The house is gone, but the home... His voice caught, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. The home might be salvageable after all. As thunder rumbled in the distance, Martin Winter completed the crib that would hold his granddaughter when she visited. The wood was smooth beneath his arthritic fingers, the craftsmanship still precise despite his age. Like family, like forgiveness, like love, imperfect but sturdy, built to last beyond the storms that inevitably came. 6 months passed in a blur of midnight feedings, pediatrician visits, and the gradual healing of both bodies and relationship. Martin settled into his apartment, transforming the spare bedroom into a nursery that mirrored the one in Jason and Jennifer's place. Baby Sarah split her time between both homes, her presence weaving the fractured family back together one tiny hand grasp at a time. By her half-birthday, a fragile new normal had established itself. Jason had returned to work, though only at one job now, Martin had quietly helped him secure a better-paying position through an old business contact. Jennifer worked part-time, her former corporate ambitions tempered by the fierce devotion she showed to her daughter. And Martin discovered that his role as grandfather filled empty spaces in his heart he hadn't realized existed. It was Jennifer who first broached the subject that had remained tactfully unmentioned since Martin's return. "The trust fund for Sarah," she said one evening as they sat on Martin's small balcony, watching the sunset while Jason bathed the baby inside. "I think we should talk about it." Martin studied her face. Still beautiful, but softer now, the sharp edges of ambition and materialism blunted by motherhood and hardship. "What would you like to know?" Jennifer fidgeted with her wedding ring, no longer the ostentatious diamond she'd once flaunted, but a simple gold band that had replaced it after they'd sold the original to cover medical bills. "Jason mentioned you made some changes to it. That you contacted your lawyer." "I did," Martin acknowledged, taking a sip of his iced tea. "I adjusted the terms. To punish us further?" The question held no accusation, only a weary acceptance. Martin shook his head. "To reflect our new reality." He set his glass down carefully. "The trust still exists for little Sarah when she turns 25. But I've added provisions for educational expenses that can be accessed earlier: college tuition, study abroad opportunities, specialized training." He paused. "And I've added a housing clause." Jennifer's eyes widened slightly. "Housing clause." "When Sarah turns 18, if certain conditions are met, the trust will provide a down payment for a family home." Martin held her gaze steadily. "A home for all of you, including space for an aging grandfather, if he's still kicking around by then." Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. "Martin, the conditions aren't financial," he continued gently. "They're about family. About regular dinners together, about holidays shared, about Sarah knowing her family history, both the triumphs and the mistakes." His voice softened. "About making sure she understands that family isn't disposable." "You're giving us another chance at the house," Jennifer whispered, comprehension dawning. "I'm giving us all another chance at being a family," Martin corrected. "The house is just structure. What matters is what happens inside it." Jennifer reached across the small table between them, the first time she had initiated physical contact since Martin's return, and gripped his weathered hand with startling intensity. "We don't deserve your forgiveness." "Forgiveness isn't about deserving," Martin replied, thinking of Sarah and the countless times they had forgiven each other's human failings throughout their marriage. "It's about choosing to move forward unburdened by the past." Before Jennifer could respond, Jason appeared in the doorway, baby Sarah wrapped in a fluffy towel, her damp hair standing up in all directions. "Somebody wants her grandpa," he announced, carefully transferring the squirming bundle into Martin's arms. As if sensing the emotional weight of the moment, Sarah reached up with perfect timing and grabbed Martin's nose, her tiny face splitting into a gummy smile that was so reminiscent of her grandmother that Martin felt his heart constrict. "Hello, sweet pea," he murmured, breathing in the clean baby scent of her. "Your grandma would have adored you." That night, after Jason and Jennifer had taken Sarah home to their apartment across the complex, Martin sat alone at his small kitchen table. Before him lay a leather-bound journal, a gift from Sarah on their 30th anniversary, in which she had written a message on the first page: "For the stories our grandchildren will want to hear someday." It had remained blank until now, Martin unable to imagine those future grandchildren without Sarah beside him to welcome them. But now, he uncapped his pen and began to write in careful, deliberate script. "Dear Sarah, named for the bravest woman I ever knew." The words flowed as Martin recorded the story of their family, not just the recent pain and healing, but the deeper history, how he and the first Sarah had met as teenagers, their struggles and triumphs, the birth of Jason, the small everyday moments that constituted a life well lived. He wrote of mistakes and forgiveness, of loss and renewal. He wrote until his hand cramped and the moon was high, filling pages with the legacy he now knew would continue. 2 years later, on baby Sarah's second birthday, Martin stood in the driveway of a modest but well-maintained 4-bedroom ranch house, watching as Jason struggled to assemble the toddler-sized bicycle he and Jennifer had saved for months to purchase. Jennifer emerged from the house carrying a homemade birthday cake, no longer the elaborate store-bought confections of their previous life, but made with infinitely more love. "Need some help there?" Martin asked his son, chuckling as Jason fumbled with the training wheels. "I've got it, Dad," Jason insisted, though he clearly didn't. After another moment of stubborn effort, he sighed and looked up with a rueful smile. "Okay, maybe I could use an extra set of hands." Martin knelt beside him, ignoring the protest of aging knees, and together they completed the assembly just as little Sarah toddled out the front door, squealing with delight at the sight of her new bike. Later, after cake and presents, after the small gathering of neighborhood children had been collected by their parents, the 3 adults sat on the back patio of the house they now shared. It had been Jennifer's idea, combining households to save money, she'd claimed, though Martin suspected her motivations went deeper than economic. The arrangement they'd initially agreed would be temporary had stretched to 6 months, then a year, and now showed no signs of changing. "I have something to share with you both," Martin said, reaching into his pocket for an envelope. "Consider it Sarah's birthday gift from her grandmother." Jason and Jennifer exchanged curious glances as Martin handed the envelope to his son. Inside was a deed, the deed to the house they now occupied, transferred into both Jason and Jennifer's names, with a life estate provision ensuring Martin's right to remain as long as he lived. "Dad, we can't accept this," Jason protested, though his fingers clutched the document tightly. "We've been saving to buy it from you. We've already put aside almost 15% for the down payment. Consider this an advance on Sarah's inheritance," Martin replied. "With one condition." He pulled out a second document, a hand-drawn architectural plan. "I'd like to add a workshop in the backyard. A proper one, where I can teach Sarah how to work with wood when she's older. Where I can pass down what I know." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears as she studied the plans. "Like a legacy," she said softly. Martin nodded, his gaze moving to the family photo now prominently displayed on their mantel, himself and the first Sarah in their youth, beside a newer image of Jason, Jennifer, and little Sarah. Past and present, pain and healing, all captured in simple frames. "Exactly like a legacy," he agreed. That night, as fireflies danced in the backyard and a gentle summer breeze carried the scent of freshly mown grass through open windows, Martin sat in the rocking chair beside his granddaughter's bed. The toddler was already asleep, one arm flung dramatically over her head in a posture identical to the way Jason had slept at her age. "You should see them now, Sarah," he whispered to his wife's memory, his gnarled fingers gently stroking the child's hair. "They're figuring it out, what really matters. What family truly means." He smiled in the dim glow of the night light. "And this little one will never doubt she's loved. Never wonder if she has a place in this world." From down the hall came the soft murmur of Jason and Jennifer's voices, followed by shared laughter, a sound that had been absent during those dark days before Martin's departure, but which now filled their home with increasing frequency. Martin closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the past 3 years, the betrayal, the revenge, the painful rebuilding, and found that it no longer pressed upon him with such suffocating heaviness. What remained was lighter, transformed, the knowledge that from terrible wounds, healing could emerge stronger than what existed before. The house they'd lost had been a structure built on false foundations, materialism, appearances, the constant striving for more. This new home, more modest but infinitely more valuable, was built on something that would endure, understanding, forgiveness, and the hard-won wisdom that family was not a burden to be discarded, but a gift to be treasured. As little Sarah sighed in her sleep, Martin thought of the trust fund that would one day help her build her own life, the workshop where he would teach her to create with her hands, and the journal of family stories waiting for her to be old enough to understand them. Not a fortune in money, perhaps, but a richness of heritage and values that no market crash could diminish. "We made it through, old girl," he whispered to Sarah's memory as he rose carefully from the rocking chair. "Not the way we planned, but maybe exactly the way they needed." Outside the window, stars punctuated the velvet darkness, constants in a changing universe, much like the love that had guided Martin through his darkest days. The revenge that had begun as an act of self-preservation had transformed into something he could never have anticipated, a family reborn, flawed but genuine, stronger at the broken places. Martin Winter closed his granddaughter's door softly and made his way down the hall toward his own room in the house that had become, against all odds, a true home once more.